might be developers and we're all passionate, but there's still other aspects to our lives besides code.
Hello, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. I'm Noel, and today we have Sacha Greif, online creator at Devographics, here to talk about the state of devs. In this episode, Sacha and I talk about trends in demographics and priorities of developers, the difficulty in interpreting these trends, and interesting value shift in the younger demographics of software developers. So here's our episode with Sacha Greif. How's it going, Sacha?
Hey, I'm doing good.
Tell us a little bit about the state of devs in 2025. Kind of what is it like? What was your goal? What motivated you?
Sure. So, I don't know how familiar listeners are with the other surveys I've been doing, but there's the first and largest one is state of JavaScript, state of JS, and I've been doing that since I think 2016, so quite a while now. And then after that, state of CSS was like a natural extension. And we started doing state of HTML to kind of catch all the other aspects of web development that weren't covered. And, I've been expanding and doing more surveys about AI, React, the React ecosystem, and so on. But then I realized one thing I wasn't really doing was asking people about things, other than code, because we might be developers and we're all passionate, of course, but there's still, other aspects to our lives besides code.
Did you kind of do some early, pre-survey kind of questionnaires to figure out what kind of questions you should be asking? Was there any early feedback you got that kind of steered you one way or the other?
It was a mix of a couple of things, I guess. So, like I said, this Tokyo Dev survey informed a lot of the questions because the person I worked with, they already did some work for a couple of years now, coming up with good questions around the workplace. I also knew there were questions that I was interested in personally, like things around, sleep and health and hobbies, physical activity, and then even just movies, music, basically the things I care about outside of programming. I wanted to know what other people, think about those. And also another factor was I wanted to try and find questions that would appeal to the people who usually don't fill out the other surveys, So it's no secret that, women, people of color, minorities are sometimes harder to reach online because they might not feel as welcome in the public spaces. X is the ultimate example where it has had its issue, and even lately, even more, where it's becoming very toxic. So you can understand why if a survey is spread through online means, it might not, have it be very representative. So I also wanted to think about, okay, how can I find questions that are going to target these groups, maybe things around discrimination, things around, whatever mental health issues, any disabilities, any issue basically that's where these underrepresented group are going to be more likely to care about them and maybe more likely to spread the survey. So that was also something that informed my survey design process.
Were there any kind of trends, I guess, that stood out in particular as you were going through?
It's kind of hard to answer because I did ask about a lot of different things. One thing that I was actually pretty happy with is that women participation increased compared to our other surveys. So traditionally, for the state of JS and so on, it's always around 6, 7, 8%. For this one, it went up to 15%. So that kind of showed me that this strategy of shifting the focus of a survey towards issues that are more relevant to different groups, like I said, does seem to be working. What else? I'm just randomly coming up with things here, but like in the health section, poor sleep came in number 1, which at least matches with my own experience because that's something I always struggle with. And so that was interesting to me personally as well. And then there's lots of like sub-trends or micro-trends when you kind of correlate different variables, So maybe one thing we can talk about later is job titles. That was interesting to correlate that with income. And then even also when looking at things by gender, like there's often, you can see different people experience things differently. So for example, when you look at how people deal with conflict, women or non-binary respondents were much more likely to avoid colleagues in the workplace if they have an issue, as opposed to more, active or decisive recourses like, getting legal counsel or requesting a transfer. So they're also more likely to change their own behavior compared to men, for example. So it's always a bit tricky to talk about these things because these are sensitive topics, and also I'm not an expert in this field. At this point, at least, I'm mostly just collecting data and seeing what patterns I can find. But taken as kind of the starting point for deeper research, I think it's actually pretty interesting.
Were there any, I guess, kind of particular takeaways on the health side that you think just might be interesting to listeners? I know you talked about, or you kind of surveyed, you had several questions about sleep. Was there anything else that was kind of particularly interesting there?
The average number of hours of sleep per night was 6.9, and that's about what I get myself on a good night, I guess.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what was interesting is there weren't that many factors that seemed to affect it. So, for example, I thought that having kids would really hurt your sleep, but in terms of sleep quantity, at least, it doesn't seem to have that big of an impact. And even when looking at strategies that people can take to get more sleep, it didn't really make a big impact. It was always around 6.8 hours of sleep per night. But I think it's interesting to see an answer where it's like, well, there's not much you can do, right?
Was that kind of a common trend, that there was kind of more, like the data was a little bit more homogenized than you expected it to be? Like, there was less differentiation across demographic factors than you expected, or was that kind of unique to sleep?
No, I think it's a common trend for surveys, maybe in general. Like, I think it really depends. I want to be careful here, but we like pattern matching as humans, and I think we're very quick to latch on to small differences and be like, oh, that's meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think often when you look at raw data, we have a lot more in common than we think between each other, and I think a lot of the times, yeah, I do think differences can get a little bit played up. Sometimes it's something you see with scientific research, like it can get overhyped a bit, especially when it comes to that whole health industry, fit supplements, like I said. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't something that surprised me, and also, of course, there's always like a rush when you do find a correlation that seems meaningful. But even then, I want to be careful about not putting too much, of my own subjectivity or my own experience into the data and coming up with conclusions that might not actually be supported. So I think that's probably a way my attitude has changed over the years, where when I first started those surveys, I was all about, hey, let's find an insight, let's find a secret that's revealed by the data. And over time, I've realized, the data, if your methodology is right, the data is probably gonna make sense and kind of be what you expected. There's not gonna be that many surprises, and if there are, that may actually be an indication that you ask a question in a leading way, or you're not considering something at some point.
Despite your efforts not to ask leading questions and things like that, were there any kind of findings in particular that surprised you, just like in how differentiated they were across different demographics? Was there anything that you expected to be more kind of standardized across respondents, but it was more varied than you thought it would be?
Well, I can give you an example, but then I have to kind of deflate my own example because I
Sure.
was looking at job titles, and one thing that was very clear is that job titles with engineer in them pay much higher than those with developer in them. So
Mm.
if you just compare front end engineer versus front end developer, there's already quite a stark difference. And so I started looking into why, because if it turned out that you can just change your resume from front-end developer to front-end engineer and then start earning like 50% more, that would definitely be one of those surprising insights that that the survey has revealed, and that would be pretty cool. But so I considered different explanations. So one thing I looked at was countries, because maybe different countries use different job titles, right? So
Yeah.
if the US uses front-end engineer, but Poland uses front-end developer, then of course, because Poland pays lower salaries on average, that's going to drag the average for developer down. And that did happen a bit, but even just looking at the US, there was still a discrepancy between developers and engineers.
Mm.
And so I looked at other factors, and then it turns out what is probably going on is it's due to company size. So again, that's where I kind of add my own, my own ideas, my own opinion to the data, because it's very hard to prove something like that without further research. But it does seem like larger companies are more likely to recruit engineers, while smaller ones are more likely to advertise for developer positions. And because larger companies have more resources, they also pay larger salaries. And that's what results in the discrepancy between the job titles. Again, probably that's my working theory for now.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was interesting, because it's both an interesting insight, like you might not know, that a front-end engineer position is more likely to be in a larger company and maybe have a role where you're a bit like charged with overseeing a more complex architecture, maybe, while front-end developer might be a smaller scope. So there are like small nuances between those job titles.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, of course, it's not the job title itself. It's not calling yourself a different job title that's going to have an impact on your income. It's actually going to work for different companies that have different pay structures.
Did you find much was the data granular to the level of like kind of technical background experience to devs that had that the role distinction there, or was it is it kind of hard to piece together like how much of a salary can this dev actually demand?
Yeah, so that's where the data kind of stops giving us answer, because I didn't ask in this survey, at least. I didn't ask about specific job descriptions or job responsibilities, but that would be something I could ask about next year. And so that's what's so cool about doing the surveys on a yearly basis, where I can kind of course correct over time and build a more granular, more detailed picture of a specific topic.
Is there anything that like you found stood out now about devs kind of around community, open source, that kind of thing versus surveys you've run in the past?
One thing that I thought was interesting, and again with the caveat that this is my opinion and don't take this as like a fact, I guess, but it seemed like when looking at gender, there was a difference between men on one side and women and non-binary respondents on the other, where women and non-binary were a bit more likely to participate in in-person events, and maybe a bit more likely to join Discord, forums, even social media. Another thing that I felt was going in the same direction was concerning open source participation. So that was a little bit lower for women and non-binary respondents. So I don't know. It seems to me you could make the hypothesis that a lot of our online spaces kind of discourage participation from minorities. And I had the experience recently of seeing a comment. So, something we all do. I left a comment on a GitHub issue saying, hey, it doesn't work for me. I don't understand. And I got a reply that was a bit, not mean or anything, but it was basically, hey, we addressed that in the thread. Please read the comments. And it was a bit dismissive, I would say. And, I don't have any like imposter syndrome. I've been in the industry for a long time. I've had my fair share of dismissive responses. So I didn't think much of it. But in the light of the results, I feel like maybe if I were a woman, a woman, if I were a person of color, if I had any kind of characteristic that puts me in a subgroup like that, I might think, well, is that person acting like that because of my identity, right? I might
Mm.
feel more targeted, or maybe I just more sensitized to these kind of microaggressions, right? So I feel like even things that are not discriminative in nature, even things that to us, or just speaking for myself, to me as a person who's fairly close to the average developer in terms of gender, race, and so on, to me it's nothing. But maybe to somebody who's different than me, it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back and makes them be like, well, open source is not for me. People are just not welcoming. And so when you put those two things in relation, I think it paints a picture that maybe, yeah, we need to do an even better job of creating these spaces for minoritized groups. And another thing that the survey reveals is that one common reason for discrimination is just age, right? As you get older, you're not one of the cool kids anymore, and you're not part of the cool group. And so that's something that's going to happen to every single one of us. And I think keeping that in mind is also a good way to remember that, discrimination is not something that happens only to others, even for people like me who are squarely in the middle of the developer demographics. And so, yeah, it's kind of just of a general message of, I guess, it sounds maybe a bit corny, but inclusivity and empathy, which I think when you look at demographics data and just remember that there's so many different ways of being a human, you kind of have to uh, consider those factors a bit more.
Did you feel like any of those trends on inclusivity, or at least like the feeling of it? Did you find that there were trends over time? Like, did you get the impression that that was the perception in the developer community was getting better or worse in that regards, or was it just surprising kind of for this survey in particular?
I'm glad you bring that up because that was another reason I forgot to mention for doing the survey. I mean, we've all noticed that there's been a bit of a sea change in the tech community in terms of values and ethos, I guess, where for the past decade, maybe the tech community has presented itself as very progressive, very, I guess, woke, to use a trendy term.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's a backlash a bit against that. I think people are more open about being conservative, which, if you are conservative on a, policy front, like economically or whatever, I mean, that's your business, but a lot of it spills out into being a bit less tolerant and being, I think, having values that, aren't ideal in my own personal opinion. Um, and so, yeah, that was also, I also wanted to measure that in terms of, well, there's been talk about the backlash against DEI initiatives. Is that something that's actually being perceived by people? Is that something that people maybe are happy about or scared about? And so, because this was the first year, I don't really have data about that yet, but it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely something I want to keep an eye out and maybe maybe start. I would say I dipped my toes into politics. We have one question about worldview in there, but going forward, actually, even though it can be a bit controversial, I want to ask about those topics even more because I think they're only gonna be becoming more important as we go forward.
You'd found that younger devs are more likely to prioritize traditional values or like free speech concerns, while older devs lean more kind of in that like traditional progressivism. Did you find that was kind of like was that a pretty solid trend that you noticed across age demographics, and is that going to inform your questions going forward?
So yeah, that's something that the survey did find a bit. It wasn't. It was pretty solid, I would say, but it only concerned like under 20 respondents.
Mm.
And another thing I should say is that a lot of respondents come from the US, so sometimes trends can be a bit US centric. And I think in this case, it's true that in the US at least, if concerns about free speech are often coded as a right wing issue, whereas of course if you're in Iran, let's say, If you want to have more free speech, that's not gonna make you right wing, right? It's
Yeah.
gonna be the opposite.
Hmm.
So it's really dependent on the country and the cultural context. So, and again, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a data scientist. So always refer back to the data if you want to be sure. Don't take my word for it. But yeah, it's something I did notice, and I think it would be interesting to dig more into it because, um, yeah, I think the next generation, of course, is gonna replace me eventually, and so I'm curious to know where they're coming from. Uh, Same with things like AI, which we don't ask about in this survey because we have another survey specifically about AI in web development. But if we are raising a generation of right-wing vibe coders, I would want to know because I think that's pretty scary.
Yeah, yeah. If you do continue to run this survey in the future, you've mentioned a couple of things, but is there anything kind of in that regard that's like at this kind of cross section of demographic information and behavioral characteristics? Like, is there anything in particular you want to focus on there? Are you ideating about questions for follow up surveys?
Yeah, like one idea I had that I didn't have time to properly implement would be maybe asking people what they think about key figures in the tech industry, Elon
Mm-hmm.
Musk, Tim Cook, whoever. Um, because yeah, I think that's something that's changed. Also, I wish I had this data from 10 years ago, but I'm sure you could chart public perception of Elon Musk and it would just fall off a cliff, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think generally public perception of actors in the tech scene has gone a bit more negative, maybe
Mm-hmm.
deservedly so, I would say. And so I can go back in time, but maybe going forward, that would be interesting to track. Um, Trying to chart if people are more left wing or right wing, even though that's kind of a simplified, spectrum. I know it doesn't encompass the entirety of a person's ideology, but I still think it could be interesting to know that and especially track it over time. And then, just looking at the feedback we got on this survey, there's actually at the end of every survey, I ask people what question they would like me to ask next time. So that always gives me like a big, literally hundreds of um, comments to look at for inspiration.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
beyond that, it's just a
Go ahead.
matter of going back section by section and trying to see how you can flesh out the questions, maybe how you can ask more questions that can support hypothesis that you have, things like that.
Has your perception of the community changed at all as a result of what you got here, or were a lot of these um, responses kind of what you expected?
I wouldn't say it's changed that much, but I think what maybe not changed, but is being revealed is that the community is not like a monolith, and especially because when you ask people about JavaScript frameworks, it's kind of no matter who you ask, you can pick 100 developers at random, and you can tweak their, geographic location, race, gender, whatever. Um, they're all gonna pretty much like React, maybe use Vue, maybe Angular. It's not gonna make that big a difference. It's not like women in Kenya use Amber exclusively for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So that doesn't have a big impact. But on the other hand, when you do a survey about these factors, career, workplace, demographics, then those intrinsic factors have a huge impact. So I think what the survey shows is that the community is like it's not a monolith, like I said, and it really highlights the fact that where you put your focus has a big impact on the data you get as a return. So for me, it's kind of a reminder of having to do a better job of being inclusive in the survey, and
Hmm.
reaching out to the different communities, and not just on the basis of gender, but also, yeah, like I said, race, also country, also disabilities, also things like large companies and small companies. Um, and of course, it's a much larger challenge than just publishing a survey on Twitter and being like, hey, fill out the survey, and not really caring who fills it out because you're only asking about do you use do you use the has selector in CSS or not.
Yeah.
That's kind of the easy version, the easy mode, and then expanding into these more sensitive issues, these more personal issues. That's definitely a challenge on a different level. But I'm glad I undertook the challenge because, like I said, we did have more participation from those demographics, and so it's been encouraging to me to see that it is possible to reach people that typically you can't reach, and I just want to keep going in that direction.
Is there anything in particular you hope, like other devs reading this, that you hope that they take away? Like, is there anything you're kind of trying to accomplish with publishing this data?
One thing I would love for people to try is playing with the data on their own. So we actually have a query builder right in the survey where you can query the API and filter the data according to the factors that are interesting or relevant to you. So, if you're in Japan, like I am, you can filter by respondents from Japan. If you're a person of color, you can filter by people who are like you. And I really want people to make the data their own and maybe find their own insights rather than, I definitely don't see my role as telling people what to think, I guess. It's more like I'm providing them with tools so that they can generate their own insights. First of all, because it's less work for me if I have to be the one to find out everything. There's so many different correlations that it would take me literally months of work for every single survey. And also because, like I said, everybody is different. So you might be interested in a completely different aspect of the data than I am. So that's why I really want people to be able to personalize their own insights, I guess.
I think that that's kind of as good a note as any. I'm going to move us into some kind of more quick form questions. If you just had to pick a favorite chart or statistic from the survey, what would it be?
So at one point, while trying to cross-reference different things, I realized one chart was saying that Minecraft players were single at a much higher proportion. Turns out the reason is because of age. So Minecraft players skew younger, and younger people are less likely to already be in a relationship. But I thought it was funny that you could, if you wanted to, you could paint Minecraft players as like losers, or depending on how you look at it. Of course, that would. I'm not saying that this is the reality. I'm just saying it was an illustration of how you could make misleading charts, and I didn't include that in the survey, but I thought it was interesting. So,
correlation, causation, etc.,
exactly.
etc. If you could add one like weird, quirky question to the next survey, what would it be? Or do you have any that you're thinking about including, just kind of for the novelty that you think would be fun to gather data on?
Maybe next time we could ask about food, favorite food.
That's a good one. Do you think devs in the future will generally skew happier or more anxious?
If I had to guess, I would say maybe more anxious, just because the world seems to be becoming more anxious. But I also think this is going to be very conditioned on people's age and background. So that's something we should definitely try to measure.
It's probably a little bit tough to discern there, where it's more in like, is the younger generation skewing more anxious, and that will pull the data up over time. Is there something you wish devs were more honest about?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's a really tough question.
I guess, are there any questions you felt that, or you had just kind of an inclination that you were getting potentially like less genuine answers on, or are you skeptical to kind of try to peer into the data that deeply?
I mean, if I start questioning people's honesty, then it kind of ruins the whole enterprise of asking them what they think. So usually I try to assume that they're filling out the survey in good faith.
Are there any questions in particular that you, again, like you are really intentional about not kind of prompt, or I guess, asking a leading question that may make developers, or anyone, people taking the survey, more inclined to be dishonest? Like, does that kind of play into your like initial pass when you're coming up with these questions?
Well, honestly, not really, because the surveys are anonymous, and so I feel if you lie on the survey, there's not much value. Like, I don't know what you're getting out
Yeah,
of
why
that
would
lie.
yeah.
But and the other aspect is that hopefully in aggregate, well, people will always enter like how many kids you have, 99, and that
Mm-hmm.
skews the data. But in aggregate, you can remove outliers, and also in aggregate, the data can make sense. You're not supposed to look at single data points anyway. So maybe it's wishful thinking, but I am hoping that any lie would kind of get drowned out by the honest answers.
I guess it's good to hear, reassuring to hear that in general you felt that you can have kind of faith in people filling out the questions to do their best to reflect what's actually going on in the industry. I guess, is there anything else, any other like kind of call to action or takeaways you'd encourage people to walk away with this from, or to go into the data kind of looking with this particular lens?
Well, this year, usually we always have a conclusion at the end of the survey, but this year I actually asked too many people to write conclusions. So instead of having a single conclusion, I ended up having 4 different essays throughout the surveys. So I think they all present different perspectives from different people with different backgrounds. So I encourage people to go check those out. If you've only seen like results on Twitter or Blue Sky or something, you didn't have the full results with the essays. I think it's worth checking out. You can of course sign up for next year's survey, or you can go take a survey right now. We always have a survey ongoing. Right now it's probably the state of HTML 2025, so we'll add a link to that. But yeah, I mean, at this point I'm doing 6 or 7 surveys a year, so there's always something to either fill out or look at if you're interested in that.
I'll look forward to seeing those, and particularly the state of devs next year, and kind of seeing where things land. Thank you for coming online and chatting with me, Sacha. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Have a good one.